Today, we are digging into the incredibly complex story of Article 370. This isn't just about a law, it's a story about the birth of a nation, a ruler facing an impossible choice, and how a crisis moment led to one of the most unique and debated parts of India's constitution. So let's get right to the heart of it. In 1947, India was piecing itself together, absorbing hundreds and hundreds of kingdoms. So how, in all of that, did just one state, Jammu and Kashmir, end up with a completely different status? To figure that out, we have to rewind the clock.
Here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with the giant puzzle of unifying India, then look at three big exceptions to the rule. We'll zero in on the ruler's dilemma in Kashmir, see how an invasion forced a decision, and finally, witness the birth of Article 370 itself. Let's dive in.
Okay, let's set the scene. It's 1947. The British are leaving, and the subcontinent is being split into India and Pakistan. But it wasn't as simple as just drawing a line. You had this huge patchwork of independent kingdoms that had to decide their future.
Just think about that number for a second. 565 different princely states, each with its own ruler, its own history. And suddenly, they all had to make a choice that would define their existence. The massive job of getting them to join the new India fell mostly on two men, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel and VP Menon. I mean, what a diplomatic challenge that was. So the choice, at least on paper, seemed pretty straightforward. The British said every ruler could join India, join the new nation of Pakistan, or try to go it alone and stay independent. For most of them, the choice was kind of obvious, but not for everyone.
Patel and Menon were actually masters at this, using a mix of diplomacy and pressure, the old carrot and stick approach. They successfully brought hundreds of states into the fold. But their strategy hit a major roadblock with three particular states. Each one was a unique, thorny problem.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting. You see a pattern here, right? In both Junagadh and Hyderabad, you had a Muslim ruler in charge of a mostly Hindu population. But Kashmir was the mirror image. You had a Hindu Maharaja, Singh, ruling a Muslim-majority population. And that complete reversal of the dynamic made his decision so much more complicated.
So, those first two problems, they were sorted out pretty decisively. In Junagadh, they held a public vote, and the people overwhelmingly chose India. Problem solved. Hyderabad was brought in after a quick military action called Operation Polo. These swift, clear-cut resolutions are a really sharp contrast to what was about to happen in Kashmir, where things were about to spiral into a huge crisis.
So let's zoom in on the man at the center of all this, Kashmir's ruler Maharaja Singh. He was really stuck between a rock and a hard place, and his dream of keeping Kashmir independent was looking less and less like a real possibility. And this just lays out his impossible position perfectly. If he joined India, a democracy, he risked his own monarchy being swept away by popular movements, especially one led by a guy named Sheikh Abdullah. But if he joined Pakistan, an Islamic state, he, as a Hindu ruler, would likely see his power just evaporate. So, faced with two really bad options, he did what a lot of people might do. He stalled. He played for time, hoping he could somehow stay independent.
But while the Maharaja was hesitating, the whole political landscape inside Kashmir was changing fast. A new, powerful figure was on the rise, Sheikh Abdullah. He was incredibly popular with the people, and importantly, he was secular, he was a socialist, and he was friends with India's leader Jawaharlal Nehru. Sheikh Abdullah didn't want the Maharaja's rule, and he didn't want to join Pakistan either. He wanted a democratic Kashmir. The Maharaja's indecision couldn't hold forever. Time was running out. And in October 1947, the situation took a sudden, violent turn that forced him to make the very choice he had been trying so desperately to avoid. And then, everything just exploded. A tribal militia with backing from Pakistan swept into Kashmir and started moving fast toward the capital, Srinagar. The Maharaja's army started to collapse. Panicked, Singh sent a desperate plea to India for military help. India's answer was clear. We can only send troops if Kashmir officially joins India. With invaders at the gates, he signed the papers. Now this is so important to understand. The accession wasn't a total handover of power. The legal document he signed was called the Instrument of Accession, and it was the exact same document that all the other 500-plus princely states signed. It gave India control over just three things: defense, external affairs, and communications. Everything else was supposed to stay with the state.
But this wasn't just a legal move. There was a huge political promise attached. India's Prime Minister, Nehru, was a strong believer in democracy. He announced that because the succession happened under extreme pressure, it was only provisional. He promised that as soon as the fighting stopped and things calmed down, the actual people of Kashmir would get the final say on their future through a plebiscite, a public vote.
So think about this unique situation. You've got a conditional accession that happened in the middle of a war, and on top of that, you have this major promise of a future vote. This whole messy reality needed a special solution when India sat down to write its new constitution.
And that solution, the answer they came up with, was Article 370. It wasn't just invented out of the blue. It was designed specifically as a constitutional tool to manage this weird in-between status of Jammu and Kashmir, bridging the gap between the emergency accession and that promised plebiscite.
So let's just break it down one more time because this is the whole foundation of it. Why was this special article even necessary? Well, the accession was limited, a public vote had been promised, only those 3 subjects were handed over, and it was agreed that Kashmir would get its own constitutional assembly to write its own state constitution. Article 370 was the legal framework built to hold all of these unique conditions together.
And if you want to know what the original writers were thinking, you just have to look at where they put this article in the Constitution. They didn't put it with all the other articles about states. No, they placed it in a special section, Part 21, which was literally titled Temporary, Transitional, and Special Provisions. That name alone tells you so much. It strongly suggests they saw this as a temporary fix, not a permanent feature.
And that leads us to the fundamental question that has hung over Article 370 for its entire existence. It was without a doubt a clever solution to a crazy, unprecedented crisis, a legal bridge built in the fog of war. But the one question that would echo for the next 70 years was, how long was that bridge ever really meant to